Hi, Sean Maurice Casey here, and I'm going to be taking you through the design, the process, the problem solving, and the iterations for my current work in progress, Mr Crossy. Mr Crossy is a first-person perspective crossword puzzle, which is coming soon to Steam. We're just going through the process of the Steamworks registration process. It's all registered now, it's just a matter of really just getting the marketing material to have the page go live. Just know that the footage you're seeing here is still very much a work in progress, and around 3 months of development so far. So, a first-person perspective crossword puzzle game. Yeah, it's a little bit different, I know, but a really easily digestible concept. So the way it works is that each word is a street and each letter is a house. And inside each house is an altar, and by placing objects on the altar, the player is essentially spelling, as the first letter of that object is what is contributed to the word of the street. I thought in this walkthrough I'd show you the process of creating the levels, the individual districts of Caelkirk, and some of the changes that we've made through development so far. But let's go through the crossword puzzle itself, as this is where it all started and informed how the levels were designed. The way we design the levels is somewhat by starting at the end, the completed crossword puzzle and then the answers themselves. The crossword clues and their answers all surround the child's past, and the way to solve them is via exploring your childhood home, by looking through the environment, finding particular paths, objects, inspecting objects, or by reading notes that are scattered around. We wanted a variety of difficulty within the puzzles themselves, so working with the project's narrative team, we started to pull key beats, small unique details and hard details from the story, and turning them into clues and interactions. For example, one of the clues we had was the game you played that night. Now, the title of the game is a fictional name, and it's called Leap Man, which is a word that the player now needs to spell. The way I really wanted the player to discover this was via exploring the protagonist's bedroom, finding and then inspecting this Game Boy-like model, opening it up and then viewing the title. We considered this an easy medium puzzle, so I planned for this clue to be given out in the second district, right after the player has solved easier puzzles which involve reading notes. The mechanic of inspecting object is something that we teach the player within a transitional puzzle which unlocks the second district. When the clues, answers, and interactions were all mapped out and planned, it was then thrown into a few crossword generators online. I basically kept on clicking until I found one that I could kind of see at a glance resembling a city. From there I started to separate sections of the crossword into creating blocks and districts. When doing crosswords, you're really given all the clues at the start, and this was something that I decided very early against, as we kind of wanted to drip feed clues and the player's path in a linear fashion, with the flow of the game being split up via districts, where the player is given 4 to 5 clues in each district, and then upon solving them, they have to do a simple treasure hunt, find the key, and then unlock the next district. And that repeats eventually for the player to backtrack to past districts, as some of the words cross over multiple districts. But we follow this process of unlocking areas within the child's house as well, having rooms that can be unlocked with the same key as district doors, a design that's very reminiscent to that of the likes of Resident Evil maps. Let's get back to the crossword though. So after the first pass of the crossword was made on paper, it was then put into engine and a crude blockout was made. Early on we wanted to test a few things. The main thing was testing to see if the city and streets were somewhat believable. We wanted to get a sense of how tall the streets were and test line of sight, as it's really important to see if the player could get lost and disoriented at times, as that's something that we really want to capture during tense moments. The city of Caelkirk consists of 108 houses over a space of roughly 300 by 300 meters. We used the straight crossword design of the streets to our advantage to block line of sight from various areas of the map, to allow more suspense when it came to navigating around our enemy AI. The almost boxed off open areas of the crossword allows us to create and place landmarks and points of interest. For example, this eating area here has a lot of open space, and it's useful for the player to be aware of where they are, but it also is a really good spot for the enemy AI to easily spot the player. The trouble that we did have though was avoiding making the world feel flat. It was important to use the height to diversify the map's flow though. As the crossword design creates straight streets, I could use verticality then to create curves and hills, and really interesting shapes within the map. As the city changes and shifts each child that Mr Crossy visits, we wanted to occasionally emphasize this by rotating the orientation of some of the buildings on each street. This really forces the player to explore and learn the map, which leaves more room for them to potentially come across Mr Crossy and enter a few chases. This was a risky decision choice though, as it could have caused player frustration, but we found in early playtests that players were often planning their routes to drop off objects on altars. Within those early playtests, we also found that the game shifts its gameplay loop, temporarily becoming a hidden object game. We knew that was going to be a factor of the core gameplay loop, but we didn't realize how much of a factor it would really play. It led to some vital iterations later. As the player will likely figure out the word that they need to spell, they then need to heavily interact with the environment's scene dressing to find out what they need. The environment's design plays a really important part of the actual level design. Initially, when the environmental artist started dressing the scenes, I did have a few design rules though, and that applied to dressing the houses and putting in some of the letter objects. The rules came down to how we were going to be laying out those letter objects and splitting them up within a street and a word. The harder the word, sometimes the harder it is to find those letters. The iteration of this design is still constantly ongoing via playtesting, and what's funny is that we found during playtests is that after setting up these rules to add diversity and difficulty towards hiding letters, is that the letter objects that were sitting out in plain sight, often on a table with a few other letter objects, were the ones that were often overlooked. So placing vowels in tighter spaces tricked players into spending a lot of their time looking there. Outside of the core gameplay loop surrounding and solving, as well as spelling the crossword puzzle itself, the player also has to navigate themselves around Mr Crossy. And we wanted him to be a moving obstacle with a knife, but we also didn't want him to always be a threat and give the player some breathing space. I tend to find a lot with small indie horror games is that the enemies are relentless, never stopping until you either kill them or they kill you. And we really want to deviate from this as much as we possibly can, as this can really get the player conditioned and desensitized towards those feelings of stress and anxiety that we want during those chase sequences. We wanted Mr Crossy to be a threat, but one that's not constantly relentless, but more of a threat that teases and toys the player. As the game takes place in a dream, we wanted death to be somewhat of an acceptable thing, where the player simply respawns back in the house at the cost of the objects that they were holding, as well as an ominous tally being counted. And that's something that we're currently trying to find a balance on, but we're also trying to kind of keep secret, as it's going to be a massive part of our marketing strategy. But it is worth showing the iterations of Mr Crossy's chases and behaviours up until now, as they're very crucial towards the core gameplay loop and how it works within the levels itself. So early on we thought that we could have 1 HP, which in initial playtest wasn't sustainable. You could merely just walk around the corner and just be stabbed. It was really annoying and it sometimes shortened the gameplay loop itself. We also had the player not drop their held items, which made it way too easy and had very little consequences when it came to dying. But we also wanted to add a little bit of diversity to gameplay within being spotted and being chased. So we gave the player 3 options upon starting a chase. The first one, pretty obvious, run home. The second one is lose the line of sight long enough, and 3 is go inside any of the houses of Caelkirk as Mr Crossy can't enter them. But the twist was that when the chase starts, all the houses in Caelkirk are locked, and the only way to unlock them is by using a consumable key called a crosskey. A crosskey is essentially a key that has a crossword on it, and it slows down time and Mr Crossy runs at you from a distance. Solving the crosskey allows you to unlock the door, and then you need to quickly get in the house or Mr Crossy will get you. Kind of think of it like a reprise function with a puzzle tied to it, rather than an unrewarding QuickTime event. But after a few months of development and playtest sessions, the function of the cross key and the chase itself grew quite fatiguing the longer players played it. So that brings us to present day and what's currently in the development pipeline of iteration, where instead at the very start of the game we're only locking some of the doors, and the player has to find cross keys and then unlock the door in order to spell that word, obstructing the spelling of the word rather than using it as a potential trap during a chase. In terms of the chase itself, we're now looking to allow Mr Crossy to go into the houses occasionally, knock on doors. We are also adding in clones similar to the likes of Agent Smith that spawn in front of you from around corners. And we're also adding in a crucifix-like puzzle, an interaction that can be used, but it's also consumable. Anyway, that's all I have for now. There's still a lot to be done on the game, but that's my journey so far in being the level designer for Mr Crossy. Whether you're watching this on YouTube or on my website, you can go there to see more of my detailed walkthroughs for some of my other games. If you happen to have any opportunities that I might be interested in, or just interested in having a chat, you can reach me via my email or my LinkedIn. See you around.